Thank you, Mr. President. The Mueller report made crystal clear that the Russian government interfered in the presidential election of the United States of America in the year 2016. They called it a, quote, sweeping and systematic fashion, close quote, of interference. I know this better than some because in my home state of Illinois, the Russian intelligence service literally hacked into our State Board of Elections voter file, gained access to a database containing information on millions of voters in my state, and then the Russians extracted data on thousands of those voters. They also targeted other state election authorities, county governments, and election equipment and technology vendors. And federal law enforcement and intelligence officers have repeatedly warned us that these interference efforts will continue into the election of 2020. In fact, former KGB agent Vladimir Putin recently mocked us, openly joking that Russia would definitely interfere again in the U.S. elections. Congress cannot sit back and ignore this threat. We must take action to help state and local election officials prepare for the 2020 elections and those beyond. I'm pleased that Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky finally relented on his opposition to any further funding to assist state and local election officials with election security efforts. But the $250 million included in the fiscal year 2020 Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill is clearly inadequate. We need to boldly invest in our election security. It is literally the cornerstone of our democracy. And we need to provide sustained funding to state and local election officials to respond to these threats that are far beyond any state's capacity to deal with. 40 of us have co-sponsored the Election Security Act, which Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota introduced in May. I was proud to join her as one of the original sponsors. The legislation would provide critical resources to election officials through an initial $1 billion investment in our election infrastructure, followed by $175 million every 2 years for infrastructure maintenance. It would also require the use of voter-verified paper ballots, strengthen the federal response to election interference, and establish accountability measures for election technology vendors. Let me bring that down to earth in simple words. If we cannot trust the outcome of an election to accurately reflect the feelings of America, we have lost the cornerstone of our democracy. There are nations, including Russia, which have proven they're doing everything in their power to stop us from having safe, accurate election counts. The question for this Senate and for this Congress is, do we care? Do we care enough to spend the resources so our states can protect the integrity of voters? And I'm not just talking about blue states from a Democratic side of the aisle. Every state, red and blue alike, would benefit from this legislation. If Republicans want to demonstrate that they are joining us in putting country over party, they should join us today and protect our democracy by passing this legislation. I've been asked to make a unanimous consent request at this point before I finish my remarks, and I thank the senator from Louisiana for being on the floor. And so, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent the Rules Committee be discharged from further consideration of S. 1540, the Election Security Act. The Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, the bill be read a third time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, reserving the right to object. And with all the respect I can muster, this bill has more red flags than the Chinese embassy. I'm objecting despite my great admiration for the senior senator from Illinois for 3 reasons. The first reason I can best explain by telling you a story. An oil man was talking to his banker one day. And the banker said, "Mr. Oil Man, you know, the bank loaned you $1 million to rework all your old oil wells, and they went dry." And the oil man said, "Could have been worse." And then the banker said to the oil man, the banker said, "Mr. Oil Man, we loaned you a second $1 million to drill brand new wells, and they all went dry. What do you say about that?" And the oil man said, "Could have been worse." And then the banker said to the oil man, "Our bank loaned you a third $1 million to buy new drilling equipment, and it all broke down. What do you say about that?" And the oil man said, "It could have been worse." The banker now is very upset. He said, "What do you mean it could have been worse? We loaned you $3 million and you lost all of it. What do you mean it could have been worse?" And the oil man said, "It could have been my money." The cost of this bill is $1 billion. That's 9 zeros. $1 billion. If I started counting to 1 billion right now, one numeral a second, I wouldn't finish until 2051. I'd be dead as a doornail. I wouldn't make it. 1 billion is a lot. We toss around 1 billion these days like it was a nickel. 1 billion seconds ago, it was 1986. Ronald Reagan was president. That's how much 1 billion is. 1 billion hours ago, the Romans were conquering Mesopotamia. As I made the point the other day on the Senate floor, 1 billion, that was 1 billion minutes ago. 1 billion hours ago, Neanderthals were roaming the earth. 1 billion is a lot. We have a $22 trillion deficit. That's 12 zeros. We got to pay this money back. I'm running out of space, and we're probably going to run out of digits if we'll keep borrowing. So my first concern is the money. Now, if we had not given any money to our colleagues at the state level, that would be one thing. But as my good friend knows, we gave 2 years ago, we gave states $380 million to combat election fraud. They haven't even spent it all yet. They haven't even spent it all yet. So yes, I have concerns about the money. Point 2. We did have problems in 2016, and I joined the senior senator in wanting to do everything we possibly can to keep it from happening again. And we did in 2018. We all had a classified briefing down in our room. I don't know the particular name of it, but it's in the visitor center. It's classified. You have to leave your phone and your iPad outside. We had the director of national intelligence there. We had the FBI director. I think we had every general in the Western Hemisphere. And we went over the 2018 elections. They went off without a hitch. They went off without a hitch. Have you read any articles about us having problems in 2018 like we had in 2016? No. Do you think if we had problems in 2018 that the members of our press would have pounced on it like a ninja? Yes. But you haven't seen those articles. Because 2018 went off without a hitch, in part because we gave the states $380 million to solve the problem. and they haven't spent it all. So if a reasonable person would wonder why we want to give them another $1 billion of American taxpayer money at this juncture. We also asked the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI, and every general who was there, are you ready for 2020? Every single one of them said, categorically, unequivocally, unconditionally, yes. And every single senator, both my Republican friends and my Democratic friends, walked out of that classified hearing impressed. The third reason I regretfully have to object to this bill, and I'm not ascribing this intention to the senator from Illinois. I am not. But there are some of my friends on Capitol Hill who would like nothing better than to take over elections in America, to have our election system federalized. Right now, we don't have one election system. We have 50 election systems. Every state runs its elections its own way, usually by the Secretary of State. Now, I believe that's a matter of federalism. I don't see anywhere in the United States Constitution or in the Federalist Papers where it says the United States government ought to be running elections for states. Number two, our states do a great job. Yeah, we had a lot of activity on Facebook and Google and other aspects of social media, but we haven't heard one allegation, or at least any proof of an allegation that any votes were stolen in 2016, much less 2018, or changed. And that's because our secretaries of state did a good job. It's also safer to have every secretary of state and every state in charge of its own election system. Because if a foreign government wants to hack your systems, they've got to go to 50 different states. They've got to do it 50 times. If we nationalize, yet again, give the federal government more power, if we nationalize elections, all a foreign national has to do is hack one system. Now, again, I am not ascribing this motive or this intent to my good friend from Illinois. I am not. But there are some who would like nothing better than to nationalize state elections and have them run by the federal government. And then the federal government, they could tell the states what to do, what kind of machines to use, whether you need paper ballots, how to order the ballots, what kind of, if you have electric machines where you walk into a booth, what kind of color of the curtain you'd have to have. And then you'd have a federal agency get involved, and they'd start promulgating regulations. And before you know it, casting a vote would be like building a bridge. And it is a matter of federalism, Mr. President. Now, those who disagree with me will say, oh, Kennedy, you're exaggerating. This bill doesn't do that. It doesn't federalize elections. Yeah, it does. You know how we federalize things around here? We get the object of the federalization hooked on the money. Those who want the federal government to run everything never go right at it. They sneak up on them. And they say, we're going to give you $380 million. And they get a little addicted. And then we're going to give you $1 billion. And they get a little more addicted. And sooner or later, they're addicted to the money. And then the federal government's got them. And that's what worries me about this bill. I'm going to offer another bill after we're done today that I hope my good friend from Illinois will at least consider supporting. This bill would require, it's not going to cost $1 billion, I can assure you, Mr. President. This bill is going to require the chief election official of every state, usually that's the Secretary of State, as the senior senator knows better than me, but it's going to require the chief election official of every state to disclose to the Election Assistance Commission the identity of any known foreign national who has physically handled ballots, machines, or has had unmonitored access to storage facilities or tabulation centers used to support elections, or unmonitored access to election-related information or communication technology. What does that really mean? That means if a foreign national at any stage of the chain of custody has access to the machine, has access to the ballot, that's got to be disclosed. Now, if you want to do something to stop foreign nationals from interfering with our elections, we don't need to spend $1 billion. We need to pass this bill.
Is there an objection?
Yes, sir, I'm getting to that. For the reasons I described, and with great respect to the senior senator from Illinois, I object.
Objections heard.
Mr. President, I ask consent to speak for 5 minutes.
Without objection.
First, let me say this. I do respect the senator from Louisiana. We have been co-sponsors of important legislation, and I hope we will again. We see eye to eye on many things, but not on this thing. $1 billion? The federal government spends $1,500 billion every year. Is our integrity of our voting system worth $1 billion? Do you know what it's cost us to reach this point in our history where our democracy is reliable and respected around the world? It's cost more than money. It's cost the lives of men and women who went to war to fight for that, to make sure that we had the last word when it came to the future of our democracy. $1 billion, oh, overwhelming number, right? Divided by 50, and understand what's at stake here. What's at stake here is whether we care enough to invest money in our election process, not with federal mandates. We say to the states, you decide how to spend it. You have the authority over state election procedure, the color of the curtain on your booth. If you want to mandate that by state law, be my guest. But what it comes down to, and I have to disagree with my friend from Louisiana, the money we've sent to the states already has all been obligated and is going through the purchasing and procurement policies of each of the states. It isn't as if they can't figure out what to do with it. Upgrading our voting machines to make sure that they reflect technology today makes a difference. Have you bought a new cell phone recently? Have you watched any ads on television talking about the security of your cell phone? Have you listened to anybody talk about the privacy of you as an individual? It's because every single day, every single minute, and every second, someone's trying to figure out how to get into your mind and into your life. And we're trying to keep technology up with this reality. Now, what's the reality of the technology we use for voting? In my state, we have paper ballots to verify what's actually cast, but our technology is 20 years old. The Russians know that, the Iranians know that, the Chinese know that, and they're mocking us, they're laughing. If you were amused by the senator from Louisiana's story, and he's the best storyteller in the Senate, think of how amused Vladimir Putin is to listen to this debate. We can't afford to spend the money to ward off Vladimir Putin's next attack in 2020. That's what I hear from the other side of the aisle. I disagree. I think what's at stake here is so basic and so fundamental that shame on us if we won't invest the money to make sure we keep up with the attackers. Now, people say, well, 2018 went off without a hitch. It was not only the good work of state election officials, it was the hard work here in Washington of our intelligence agencies, and the senator knows that. We didn't sit back and say, well, I sure hope they don't hit us again. We went after them. I can't be more specific because we're told not to be more detailed in our response. We invest a heck of a lot of money in stopping them from ruining the 2018 election, and we're bound to do it again, and I hope we do. But to say we can't afford to protect the integrity of our vote, then what is a democracy worth? What is it worth? It's worth human lives, and it's worth our investment in this generation to make sure that those votes count, whether you live in a red state or a blue state. I'm not talking about just send this to Democratic state officials. I'm talking about across the country. I want an election to truly reflect the way the American people feel about candidates and issues that are before them. And that's why I'm so disappointed by this senator's objection. Yes, I will carefully consider his bill. Maybe there's some room here. But when we say $1 billion disqualifies you from being considered seriously, when it comes down to the integrity of our voting system, $1 billion is too much. Turns out the Republican leader has suggested 1/4 of that amount, and nobody blinked. I happen to think $1 billion is more realistic in terms of helping our voting system across this country. Shame on us if the result of a presidential election is later found to have been tampered with by our enemies overseas. Shame on us if we didn't do everything we were supposed to do in the Senate and the House, in this government, to protect that God-given right for a democracy that we cherish so much. Mr. President, I yield the floor.